Officer Laura Mitchell checked the clock on the dashboard as the patrol car rolled slowly down Main Street. The light was already starting to fade, the kind of gray winter afternoon New Jersey knew too well. Cold without snow, quiet without peace. Storefronts reflected dull streaks of sky. A thin wind carried the smell of wet asphalt and metal, the scent that always lingered after a long day of traffic and tired engines. Beside her, Bruno sat upright, alert but calm. His harness rested snug against his broad chest, the patch reading K9. Unit worn from years of service, Laura glanced at him, her hand brushing the familiar weight of the leash. "Almost done, buddy," she murmured. Bruno's ears flicked. He didn't need reassurance. He never did. But Laura did. This was supposed to be her last shift of the week. One more routine patrol, one more quiet drive through a town that pretended it was safer than it really was. She had promised her son she'd be there before sunset, promised she wouldn't be late again. Promises were harder to keep these days. She parked near the curb and stepped out. Boots touching pavement with a practiced ease, Bruno followed. Stride matched to hers. A rhythm built over years of trust. People noticed them the way they always did. Some with respect, some with discomfort. Most with the kind of look that said, "Don't get involved." This town had learned how to look away. Laura felt it in the way conversations dropped when she passed, in the way shop owners nodded but didn't smile, in the way certain names were never spoken out loud, only hinted at, like storms you sensed before they arrived. She adjusted her jacket, the badge catching a brief glint of dying light. Law enforcement training taught you to read a street the way sailors read the sea. And right now, everything felt too still. Bruno stopped suddenly. Laura felt it through the leash before she saw it. The subtle tension, the shift in posture. Her eyes followed his gaze to a black sedan parked half in the loading zone, engine still warm, windows tinted darker than regulations. A loud, "Good catch," she whispered. She exhaled once, steadying herself, and walked toward the vehicle. The driver's door swung open before she reached it. A young man stepped out, well-dressed, expensive shoes meeting the dirty curb without hesitation. His confidence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It sat on him like a custom-made suit. "Evening," Laura said, her tone neutral. "You're parked illegally. I'll need to see your license and registration." The man looked her over slowly, the way someone inspected a product they didn't respect. Then he smiled, not friendly, not amused. Something sharper. "You serious right now?" he said. "Do you know who I am?" Laura didn't answer right away. She'd heard the name before. Everyone had Ryan Cole, son of a man who owned more than businesses, son of a man who owned silence. "I'm asking for your documents, sir," she replied. Bruno sat at her side, perfectly still. His eyes never left Ryan, around them. The street seemed to hold its breath. A woman paused mid-step. A man turned away too quickly. Phones hovered at waist level, undecided. Ryan laughed softly and reached into his jacket, pulling out his wallet with exaggerated slowness. He flipped it open, then let the contents slip from his fingers, plastic and paper scattered across the pavement. "Oops," he said. Laura's jaw tightened. She crouched to pick them up, instinctively placing herself between Ryan and Bruno. As she reached down, she felt Bruno shift, just slightly, his body angling to shield her without command. Ryan's smile faded. "Keep that dog away from me," he snapped. Two men in tailored suits appeared behind him, close enough now that Laura could feel the pressure of their presence. She stood, documents in hand, suddenly aware of how alone she was. The wind cut sharper, and somewhere deep inside her, a warning bell began to ring, quiet, insistent, telling her that this shift was no longer routine, and whatever came next would follow her long after the sun went down. The warning bell Laura felt didn't fade. It grew louder as Ryan Cole took a step closer, close enough that she could smell expensive cologne cutting through the cold air. He glanced at the badge on her chest, then at Bruno, then back to her face. "Relax," Ryan said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "You look tense." Laura straightened. "Sir, I asked you to step back." He didn't. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her, as if she were a puzzle he'd already solved. "You new around here?" he asked. "Because everyone else knows when to mind their own business." Behind him, the two men in suits spread slightly, blocking the sidewalk without making it obvious. Their movements were practiced, not aggressive, just enough to say, "We're here." Bruno's muscles tightened beneath the harness. Laura felt it through the leash again. The quiet readiness of an animal trained not for fear, but for duty. She rested her palm against his shoulder, steady, grounding. "License and registration," she repeated. Ryan sighed, exaggerated. Like a bored customer dealing with poor service, he bent down, picked up one of the cards she'd handed back, and flicked it between his fingers. "You really want to do this right now?" he said. "On a Friday?" Laura met his eyes. "I don't have a choice." That made him smile. "You always have a choice," Ryan said softly. "You just don't always like the consequences." A man across the street turned away, suddenly very interested in his phone. Another stepped into a store he hadn't planned to enter. Laura noticed all of it, the shrinking circle, the way the town folded in on itself. She keyed her radio, keeping her voice calm. "Dispatch, I'm running a plate on a black sedan, New Jersey." Ryan's laugh cut her off. "Don't bother," he said. "It's clean. Everything I own is clean." One of the suited men leaned in, just enough for Laura to hear. "Officer," he murmured, polite as church. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Time 800 sems." Laura ignored him. She finished the call, waited. The radio crackled back. Routine confirmation, no flags, no surprises. Ryan spread his hands. "See?" She nodded once. "You're still parked illegally. I'll be issuing a citation." The temperature seemed to drop another degree. Ryan's eyes hardened. "You really don't get it," he said. "This town runs on relationships, on favors. My father—" "I don't care who your father is," Laura said. The words landed heavier than she expected. A few heads turned. The suited men exchanged a glance for a moment. Ryan looked almost amused. Then something darker slid into place behind his eyes. "You should," he said. Because he cares who you are. Laura felt the weight of that sentence settle in her chest. She thought of her son waiting at school, of the promise she'd made, of how many times she'd swallowed her pride to keep the peace Bruno let out, a low, controlled sound. Not a growl, but a warning. His eyes never left Ryan noticed. He took a half step toward Bruno, then stopped. "You hear that?" he said, looking around. "That thing sounds dangerous." "Bruno," Laura said quietly. He stayed seated, disciplined, his body angled slightly in front of her without being told. Ryan smirked. "Control your dog." "I am," she replied. That's when Ryan dropped the card again. This time he stepped closer as she bent to retrieve it, invading her space. One of the suited men reached out, not to grab her, just to block her path back. Laura straightened slowly, heart pounding now. "Move," she said. Ryan leaned in. "Last chance," he whispered. "Walk away. Forget you saw anything." For a split second, Laura considered it. The easy exit, the silence everyone else chose. Then she looked down at Bruno. He looked back at her, steady, trusting, ready. Laura lifted her chaitsu. "Time 300 mems. Step away from me," she said. Louder now, clear. "Both of you." Ryan's smile vanished. "You just made a mistake," he said. The street felt smaller, tighter. The air thickened, as if the town itself was bracing. And somewhere behind Laura, a door slammed. Footsteps echoed once, then stopped. She didn't turn around, not yet. Laura felt the shift before anything happened. It was the same feeling she'd learned to trust years ago on night patrols, the moment when a situation stopped being tense and became dangerous. "Sir," she said, voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "I'm issuing a citation. Step back." Ryan didn't move. He looked past her shoulder, then back to her, as if weighing how far he could go without consequence. One of the suited men subtly adjusted his stance, blocking Laura's line back to the patrol car, not touching her, not yet. The radio on Laura's shoulder crackled once, then went quiet again. Bruno's body shifted closer to her leg. He wasn't growling. He wasn't lunging. He was simply there, solid, present, a living barrier. Laura felt his warmth through the winter air. Ryan noticed that too. "Funny thing about dogs," he said, crouching just enough to be level with Bruno's eyes. "They only understand force." Laura's hand tightened on the leash. "Stand up now." Ryan straightened slowly, exaggerated, as if mocking her authority. "You see?" he said to the small crowd that had formed at a distance. "She's scared of her own animal." A woman across the street shook her head, then looked away. A man muttered something under his breath and disappeared into an alley. Phones rose a few inches, then lowered again. No one stepped forward. Ryan rolled his shoulders, loosening up like someone about to enjoy himself. "I gave you a chance," he said. "I really did." He flicked the ticket book out of Laura's hand. It hit the pavement, skidding across the wet asphalt. "That's littering," he added with a grin. Laura bent down instinctively, the training drilled into her. Secure the documents, de-escalate, regain control. As she crouched, she felt the leash go taut for a fraction of a second. Bruno shifted. It wasn't aggressive. It was protective. Ryan's expression changed. Not fear, something uglier, offended pride. I told you to keep that dog away from me. Before Laura could stand, one of the suited men grabbed her arm, not rough, but firm enough to stop her from moving. The world narrowed to sound and motion. Laura twisted, trying to pull free. Let go, she snapped. Ryan took a step forward. Time slowed. Laura saw the polished toe of Ryan's shoe lift. She saw the angle of his leg. She heard herself shout Bruno's name, her voice cracking through the cold air. Then the kick landed. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. Just a dull, sickening thud as leather met bone. Bruno collapsed onto his side, the breath driven out of him in a broken sound that cut straight through Laura's chest. Not a bark, not a growl, a wounded gasp. No! Laura screamed. She lunged, but the grip on her arm tightened, pulling her back. Bruno tried to rise, claws scraping uselessly against the pavement. His body trembled, his eyes, still locked on Laura, were wide, confused, trusting. Ryan laughed. You see, he said to no one in particular, just a dog. The second kick came slower, deliberate. Laura thrashed, panic surging now, hot and blinding. Stop! He's a service animal, she cried. He's K9, he's trained, please! The suited men didn't look at her. They didn't have to. They'd seen worse. Ryan hovered over Bruno, savoring the moment, the power. You really thought the badge meant something? He said. This town belongs to us. Bruno let out another strained sound, his body curling inward, trying to protect what he could. His tail twitched once against the ground. Laura felt something inside her tear open. Anger, fear, guilt, all crashing together. She should have walked away. She knew that's what everyone expected. That's what survival looked like here, but Bruno hadn't walked away. He'd stayed. Please, she whispered now, tears streaming unchecked. Please. Ryan lifted his foot again, and that was when the sound changed. Heavy boots struck the pavement behind them, measured, controlled, not hurried, not uncertain. Ryan hesitated. The grip on Laura's arm loosened just enough for her to feel it. A shadow fell across the scene, long and steady, blocking the fading light. A calm voice spoke from behind her, low and unmistakably firm. Step away from the dog. The street went silent. Laura didn't turn around yet, but for the first time since the encounter began, she felt something else cut through the fear, hope. The voice came again, calm and unmistakable. Step away from the dog. Ryan didn't turn right away. He stood frozen for half a second, his foot still hovering above Bruno, as if his body had heard the command before his ego could argue. The street felt suspended in that pause. No traffic, no voices, just the low whine of the wind threading between buildings. Laura felt her arm loosen as the suited man hesitated. She twisted free and dropped to one knee beside Bruno, her hands shaking as they hovered, afraid to touch the wrong place. Easy, boy, she whispered, though her voice was breaking. I'm here. Bruno tried to lift his head. The effort was too much. A rough, fractured breath escaped his chest. A sound that didn't belong in a place like this. It cut through Laura deeper than the kick ever could. Ryan finally turned. The man behind them stood a few feet away, hands open, posture relaxed but unyielding. Mid-40s, maybe older, worn jacket, scuffed boots, the kind of stillness that came from experience, not hesitation. His eyes didn't flicker, they stayed locked on Ryan. "Who the hell are you?" Ryan snapped, forcing a laugh that came out too loud. "You lost, old man?" The man didn't answer the insult. He took one step forward, just one, and placed himself between Ryan and Bruno. The space around him shifted, as if the street itself had decided where it stood. "That dog is injured," he said. "You're done." Ryan scoffed, trying to reclaim the moment. "You think you can tell me what to do? You have any idea whose town this is?" Laura looked up then, meeting the stranger's eyes for the first time. There was no anger in them, no excitement, just certainty. "I don't care," he said simply. Ryan's smile faltered. He masked it quickly, straightening his coat, puffing himself up. "My father owns half the businesses on this block," he said. "Judges, lawyers, you name it, this goes away." "Maybe," the man replied, "but not tonight." Ryan lifted his foot. Again, a show of defiance more than intent. "You touch me, you're finished." The man moved. It wasn't fast in the way movies made it fast. It was precise. A clean step, a firm grip. He caught Ryan's ankle mid-air and turned his own body, using leverage instead of force. Ryan went down hard, the sound of his body hitting the pavement sharp and final. The laughter died instantly. Ryan lay there, stunned, pain blooming across his face as he gasped for breath. The two suited men surged forward, then stopped cold. Another figure had appeared at the edge of the scene. Younger, broad-shouldered, jacket open just enough to reveal the grip of a sidearm. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The balance of power flipped. Phones rose higher now. No one hid them anymore. The truth, once invited in, moved fast. Laura pressed her hands gently along Bruno's ribs, counting breaths, watching for signs she knew too well. Blood darkened his fur along one side. Her stomach clenched, but she forced herself to stay focused. The man knelt beside her, already pulling off his jacket. "Pressure here," he said, handing it to her. "Slow and steady." She nodded, swallowing hard, following his lead. Bruno's tail twitched weakly against the pavement. Sirens wailed in the distance. Real authority this time. Ryan began to shout. Threats spilling out in desperate bursts, lawyers, lawsuits, consequences. No one listened. As officers moved in and cuffs clicked shut, the man stood and stepped back, already fading into the background. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't look for gratitude. Laura did. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She tried to speak. He shook his head once, almost imperceptibly, then turned away as paramedics lifted Bruno onto a stretcher. The dog turned his head just enough to find Laura's face. His eyes were tired, but calm, trusting. She held his gaze until the doors closed. The street exhaled. Nothing would ever be the same. Which part matters most to you? 1. Protecting service animals. 2. Standing up to abuse of power. Or 3. The quiet courage of bystanders. Comment 1, 2, or 3 below. The ambulance doors slammed shut, sealing Bruno inside with the paramedics. The siren cut through the cold air and pulled away, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the chaos before it. Laura stood frozen for a moment, hands still curled as if they were pressing against his ribs, as if she could hold him together by will alone. An officer touched her elbow. "You okay, Laura?" She nodded, though her throat wouldn't cooperate. Words felt useless now. She watched the taillights disappear and felt the town settle back into itself, like it always did after trouble. Quiet, cautious, pretending nothing had happened. Ryan Cole was on his feet again, cuffed but loud, his voice carrying across the street with practiced confidence. "This is harassment," he shouted. "You're all going to regret this. Father will have this place shut down." Laura didn't look at him. She focused on the cracks in the pavement, on the faint smear of blood that no amount of rain would erase from her memory. The weight of what she'd almost lost pressed in from all sides. A senior officer approached, clipboard in hand, already shifting into procedure. "We'll need your statement," he said gently. "Everything you saw." Everything she saw. Laura closed her eyes for a beat. She saw Bruno stepping in front of her without a command. She heard that broken sound again. She felt the grip on her arm and the old, familiar fear that didn't come from danger, but from knowing how easily the system could look away. "I warned him," she said quietly. "I told him to step back." The officer nodded. He'd heard versions of this before. Around them, the crowd thinned. Some people lingered just long enough to convince themselves justice had been done. Others left quickly, unwilling to be associated with it at all. A few stayed, whispering now, the way people did when courage finally felt safe. Ryan kept talking. Threats turned into promises. Promises turned into names, judges, attorneys, donations. Each word was a reminder of how often power survived consequences. Laura felt small, smaller than she'd felt in years. Time 800 mounds. A woman approached hesitantly, clutching her purse. "Officer," she said, voice trembling. "I saw what he did. If you need a witness, I'm here." Laura looked up, surprised. She nodded once. "Thank you." It wasn't enough to undo the damage, but it mattered. Another man stepped forward, then another, not many, just enough to feel like a crack forming in the wall of silence. Across the street, Laura spotted the man who had intervened earlier, the quiet one, the one who changed everything. He stood near the edge of the scene, speaking briefly with another officer, his body already angled away, ready to disappear back into anonymity. She wanted to thank him, to ask his name, to understand why he'd stepped in when no one else would. But something held her back. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was the knowledge that people like him didn't do it for recognition. They did it because they couldn't not do it. Ryan was led toward a patrol car, still talking, still convinced the world would bend for him. Laura finally met his gaze. There was fury there, and something else now. Uncertainty. "You think this changes anything?" He sneered. Laura said nothing because she didn't know if it would. Later, at the station, she sat alone at a metal desk, replaying the incident as she typed her report. Every word felt inadequate. How do you document loyalty? How do you file the sound of a partner's pain? Her phone buzzed, a message from the hospital. "He's stable." Laura exhaled for the first time all evening. She pressed her fingers to her forehead and let the relief wash over her, brief and fragile. She knew better than to believe this was over. Power didn't collapse in one night. It pushed back, harder, smarter. But tonight, at least, Bruno was alive. And somewhere out there, a line had been drawn. Visible now. Undeniable. Laura stood, squared her shoulders, and headed back into the cold. Power had tried to make her feel helpless. It hadn't won. The hospital corridor smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Laura sat on a plastic chair beneath flickering lights. Her uniform jacket folded neatly in her lap. She hadn't taken it off. It felt wrong to leave anything behind tonight. A nurse passed, nodded once and disappeared through double doors. Somewhere beyond them, Bruno lay sedated, breathing through pain she couldn't share. Laura stared at the floor, counting the tiles, grounding herself the way she'd been taught. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. She looked up. The man from the street stood a few feet away, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. Under the fluorescent lights, he looked older than she'd first thought. Not weak, weathered. "You don't have to wait," he said quietly. "He's in good hands." Laura stood. "You saved his life." He shook his head. "I stopped something that shouldn't have happened." There was a pause, the kind that held more than words. "Jack Turner," he added. "I work down at the marina." "Laura Mitchell," she said. "Police." "I know." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been sitting in her chest since the sirens faded. "Why did you step in?" Jack considered it, eyes drifting toward the doors. "Because I've seen what happens when people don't." That was all he offered, and somehow it was enough. They walked outside together. The night had settled in, colder now, sharper. Jack stopped near the curb. "For what it's worth," he said, "you did everything right." Laura let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Praise wasn't something she expected. "Not here, not tonight." "Ryan Cole won't let this go," she said. "Neither will his father." Jack nodded. "Men like that rarely do." "You're not worried?" she asked. Jack met her gaze. "I've been worried before. This doesn't feel like that." She watched him turn and head down the street. Heavy boots striking pavement with that same measured rhythm she'd heard earlier. The sound that had changed everything. Back at the station, the night shift hummed with low conversation and paperwork. Laura filed supplemental reports, careful with every detail. She knew the next few days would matter. Evidence statements. Pressure from above. Her phone buzzed again. A photo this time. Bruno, bandaged, eyes half open. The caption read, "He tried to sit up when he heard your voice." Laura smiled through tears. Outside, somewhere beyond the glass, a town wrestled with what it had witnessed. Rumors traveled faster than facts now. Names were being said out loud, not shouted, but spoken, and for the first time in a long while that felt dangerous. To the right people, Laura closed her locker and stepped back into the night. The wind cut across the lot, but she walked straighter than she had hours before. Power had tried to crush her. It had failed, not because the system worked, but because someone had drawn a line and because a dog had stood his ground. Morning came gray and thin. The kind that didn't promise much, but still showed up. Laura drove past the marina on her way back to the station, the water flat and steel-colored under a low sky. She slowed without meaning to. Jack Turner's boat was tied where it always was, paint chipped, lines neat. He wasn't there, and at the station, the mood had shifted. Not louder, tighter, phones rang and stopped. Doors opened and closed. The chief avoided eye contact as Laura passed, which told her more than any briefing could. Ryan Cole had posted bail before dawn. She read it on a screen, then read it again. The number didn't matter, the speed did. A detective leaned against the counter. "Witnesses are already getting nervous," he said quietly. One backed out. Laura nodded. She'd expected that. Fear had a way of returning. Once the cameras left, she stepped outside to clear her head. The air smelled like rain. Across the street, a black SUV idled too long, tinted windows, engine running. It pulled away the moment she noticed it. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "He's awake," the message read, "asking for you." Laura didn't hesitate. She drove straight to the hospital. Bruno lay propped on one side, bandages wrapped tight, chest rising carefully. His eyes tracked the door the second she entered. His tail thumped once, slow but determined. "Hey, tough guy," she said, kneeling. Her voice broke despite her best efforts. "You scared me." Bruno huffed softly, as if apologizing. The vet explained the recovery. Weeks, maybe months. Laura listened, nodded, signed forms. None of it mattered as much as the fact that he was here. As she stood to leave, a man stepped into the doorway. "Jack, figured you'd come," he said. They stood there for a moment, the beeping monitors filling the space between them. "Ryan's out," Laura said. Jack nodded. "I heard. You still think this isn't something to worry about?" Jack looked at Bruno, then back at her. "Worry's not the same as fear," he said. "Fear makes you sloppy." Laura studied him. "You ever deal with people like Ryan before?" Jack exhaled. "Different uniforms, same entitlement." Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. That afternoon, word spread fast. A shop owner called the station to retract a statement. Another asked for anonymity. The town's spine bent again under familiar pressure. Laura felt it, the pull to stay quiet, to wait it out, to protect what little stability she had left. She thought of Bruno on the pavement, of the moment he'd shifted without command, guided by instinct, older than training. That evening, as rain began to fall, Laura stood on her porch watching headlights pass. The same black SUV slowed near her house, then continued on. She didn't flinch. Across town, Jack locked up the marina office and stepped into the storm. He sensed movement before he saw it, a shape by his truck, a presence that didn't belong. A voice came from the dark. "You should have stayed out of it." Jack didn't turn around. "Funny thing," he said calmly. "I didn't." Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the suited silhouette. Then darkness again. Somewhere between them, the line was drawn once more. Quiet, unmistakable instincts didn't lie. And neither did consequences. Rain had washed the streets clean by morning, But it hadn't washed away what people felt. Laura sensed it the moment she stepped into the station. The looks that lingered a second too long. The voices that lowered when she passed. Pressure didn't shout, it leaned. The chief called her into his office. No accusations, no praise, just procedure wrapped in caution. "We're moving forward," he said, tapping a file. "But this is going to get complicated." Laura nodded. She already knew. Outside, reporters hovered at the edge of the lot. Umbrellas angled like shields. She didn't stop. She drove straight to the courthouse where Ryan Cole was scheduled to appear for a preliminary hearing. The building's stone steps gleamed wet, imposing, indifferent. Ryan arrived surrounded by lawyers. He looked rested, confident. He smiled for cameras, as if this were a misunderstanding he'd soon outgrow. When his eyes found Laura's, the smile thinned inside. The air was stale with old wood and old power. A few witnesses sat rigid, hands folded, eyes forward. Laura took her seat and waited. The hearing moved quickly. Motions, objections, delays dressed up as diligence. Ryan's attorney spoke of isolated incidents and conflicting accounts. Laura listened, jaw set, hands steady. She spoke when called, her words measured, factual, unyielding. Then a door at the back opened. Jack Turner stepped in. He wore the same worn jacket, the same scuffed boots. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't look at the cameras. He walked to the bench and waited to be acknowledged, posture straight, breathing even. The judge frowned. "State your business." "I witnessed the assault," Jack said, "and I intervened." Murmurs rippled through the room. Ryan's attorney objected immediately. The judge held up a hand. Jack's testimony was brief. Precise, no embellishment. He described the kick, the sound, the hesitation before it happened again. Described stepping between a raised foot and a wounded animal. He described why, because it was wrong, he said, and because someone had to stop it. Ryan shifted in his seat. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his posture. Not fear, something colder. Calculation. Outside the courthouse, the confrontation continued without words. Ryan passed Laura on the steps, close enough for her to hear him breathe. "You think this ends well for you?" he muttered. Laura didn't answer. She didn't need to. Jack paused beside her. "He wants a reaction," he said quietly. "He won't get one," she replied. Across the street, a black SUV idled. Laura noticed it. Jack noticed it too. Their eyes met, an unspoken agreement. Later that afternoon, as the sky cleared, Laura received a call from the hospital. Bruno had taken a few steps on his own short. Careful, the vet sounded optimistic. She smiled for the first time in days. At the marina, Jack found a note tucked under his wiper. No signature, just a message. Last warning. He tore it in half and let the pieces fall into the water. That night, Laura stood by Bruno's kennel, fingers brushing the metal door. He lifted his head, eyes bright, alert despite the bandages. "You ready to come home soon?" she asked. Bruno's tail moved, slow, determined. Outside, the town held its breath. Lines had been drawn in public now. Pressure would come harder, smarter, but something fundamental had shifted. The confrontation wasn't over. It had just changed shape. The courthouse emptied slowly, as if the building itself needed time to release what had been said. Inside, Laura descended the stone steps into a colder light, her breath visible now. The rain had stopped, but the air still carried its echo, clean on the surface, unsettled underneath. Across the plaza, Ryan Cole paused with his legal team. He leaned in, whispering, the corners of his mouth tight. One of the attorneys, polished, expensive, the kind you hired when you expected leverage, nodded and scanned the crowd. Damage control had begun. Laura recognized the choreography. She'd seen it before. Delay, dilute, deflect. Jack stood a few paces behind her, hands clasped loosely, eyes moving without hurry. He wasn't watching Ryan, he was watching everyone else. "You okay?" he asked. Laura nodded. "That was more than I expected." Jack shrugged. "Truth has weight, people feel it." Not everyone welcomed that weight. By afternoon, the phone calls started. The chief called Laura into his office again. This time with the door closed. He didn't sit, neither did she. "City Council wants everything airtight," he said. "They're bringing in a legal defense attorney to advise on exposure. That doesn't mean they don't support you." Laura heard what he didn't say. Support had limits, budgets had ceilings, politics had a gravity of their own. "I'll stick to the facts," she said. "That's all I'm asking." Outside the station, a small knot of reporters waited. Laura walked past without comment, her focus narrowing to the present. Paperwork, calls, evidence logs. She called the hospital on her break. Bruno had eaten a little, stood longer. The vet's voice carried cautious optimism at the marina. Jack locked up early. He found a pair of fresh tire tracks near his truck, deeper than the rain should have allowed. He didn't take a picture. He didn't call it in. He filed it away where experience lived. That evening, a town meeting convened in the high school gym. Folding chairs scraped the floor. The lights buzzed. A handful of residents spoke, careful words, qualified statements. A woman stood and said she'd seen what happened. Her hands shook, but she didn't sit back down when murmurs rose. Laura listened from the back, arms folded, feeling the shift. Not dramatic, not complete, but real. The balance was moving, inch by inch. Ryan didn't attend. His father didn't either. Their absence spoke louder than any statement. Afterward, Laura drove to the hospital. Bruno's eyes tracked her from the moment she entered. He tried to sit. She gently stopped him, laughing through the tightness in her chest. "Soon," she promised. "One step at a time." She sat there until visiting hours ended, the monitors keeping time. When she left, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "We're not done," she deleted it. Outside, Jack waited by his truck. "He's testing edges," he said when she told him, "seeing who blinks." "I won't," Laura replied. Jack nodded once. "Good." They stood in the cold for a moment, watching the hospital windows glow. Somewhere inside, a dog rested because two people had refused to look away. Somewhere else, power recalculated. The balance hadn't flipped completely, not yet, but it had shifted, and once it moves, it rarely returns to where it was. The morning Laura brought Bruno home, the sky was pale and undecided, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it felt. She parked in front of her small house and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, listening to the quiet, no sirens, no phones. Just the low hum of a neighborhood waking up. The vet had warned her not to rush him. Slow walks, no stairs. If you can help it, watch his breathing. Laura nodded through it all, committing each word to memory the way she did with radio codes and procedures. Bruno emerged from the clinic carefully, bandages neat, movements deliberate. He leaned into her leg as if confirming the ground beneath him was real. Laura swallowed the tightness in her throat and clipped the leash on with a steady hand. At home, she laid out the rug he liked by the window. Bruno lowered himself onto it with a soft huff, eyes following her every move. She filled his bowl halfway, sat beside him, and waited while he ate, slowly, thoughtfully, alive. Her phone buzzed, messages stacked up, check-ins from colleagues, a brief note from the chief, a clipped update from the prosecutor's office. Charges stand, more witnesses coming forward. Laura exhaled, not relief, momentum. A knock at the door came mid-morning. Jack stood on the porch, hat in hand, boots cleaned of marina grit. He looked past Laura to Bruno, then nodded once. "Good to see you," he said. "Both of you." Bruno's tail moved, cautious but certain. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee that had gone lukewarm. Jack didn't linger on the past week. He asked practical questions, recovery timelines, court dates, what Laura needed. "People are talking," Laura said, "more than before." Jack nodded. "They talk when they think it's safe, then they decide if it's worth it." A car slowed outside, idled, moved on. Laura noticed, Jack noticed too. Neither commented. In the afternoon, a reporter called asking for a statement. Laura declined. She'd learned the cost of words when they weren't necessary. Instead, she focused on small things, changing Bruno's bandage, opening the window an inch, letting the winter air in. Later, as dusk approached, Laura took Bruno out for a short walk. The neighborhood recognized him. A woman waved. A man nodded, respectful. Someone left a handwritten note on the mailbox. "Glad he's okay." Bruno paused at the end of the block, breathing measured, eyes alert. Laura stopped with him, crouched, and met his gaze. "You did good," she said quietly. "I've got you now." Back at the house, the evening news played softly. Footage from the courthouse, a headline about accountability and animal cruelty statutes. Legal language, sanitized but unmistakable. Laura turned it off that night. As Bruno slept, she sat on the floor beside him, back against the couch, letting exhaustion finally catch up. The fear was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was focused. Her phone buzzed once more, a text from Jack. "Pressure's coming, stay steady," she replied. "We are outside." The town settled into darkness. Somewhere, power was recalculating. Somewhere else, a line held because a dog had survived. And because people were watching now, saving Bruno hadn't ended the fight. It had given it a heart. The first subpoena arrived on a Tuesday, slid under Laura's station mailbox like a quiet promise. Then another followed, and another. Names appeared that hadn't been there before. Clerks, passers-by, a delivery driver who'd been parked at the curb with his engine running. The truth was doing what it always did when it sensed daylight. It multiplied. Laura spent the morning preparing with the prosecutor, a woman with tired eyes and a disciplined voice. They went over timelines, angles, language, no adjectives, no emotion. Facts were the safest bridge across pressure. Outside the conference room, the hallway hummed with restrained energy. A uniformed officer leaned in and whispered, "You see the feeds?" Laura hadn't. She didn't need to. She could feel the town vibrating with it. The clips, the still frames, the slowed-down moments people replayed until denial ran out of places to hide. At the courthouse steps, cameras waited again, fewer than before, but steadier. Laura walked past without stopping, her posture unremarkable on purpose. Inside, the air felt different. Less stale, more alert. As if the building itself had been reminded of its job. Ryan Cole arrived late. He looked sharper than before. Tailored coat, careful smile. But something had shifted beneath the polish. He scanned the room, counting eyes, recalibrating. When he caught Laura's gaze, he looked away. First, witnesses were called in sequence, not dramatic, not heroic, just people saying what they saw, when they saw it, and why they hadn't spoken sooner. Fear came up more than once, so did regret. The judge listened without comment. Jack testified last. He spoke the way he always did, plain, exact, uninterested in theater. He described the pause before the second kick, the space where choice lived. He described stepping forward, because he'd learned, a long time ago, what happened when no one did. Ryan's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Outside, the clips ran. The sound of Bruno's broken breath, never fully shown, never exploited, was enough. Sponsors pulled back. A charity returned a donation. A councilman canceled a photo op. Consequences, small but cumulative, began to find their marks. That afternoon, Laura received a call from the hospital. The vet wanted to check Bruno's progress on video. Laura held the phone steady as Bruno took 3 careful steps across the rug. The vet smiled. "He's healing," she said. "So are you." On the drive home, Laura passed the marina. Jack's truck was there. She slowed, waved. He lifted a hand in return. No celebration, just acknowledgement. At home, Laura cooked a simple dinner and ate standing up, listening to the radio. The anchor used words like accountability and community standards. Laura turned it down. Labels mattered less than outcomes. That evening, a knock came at her door. A young man stood there, hat in his hands. "I was there," he said. "I didn't say anything I should have." His voice shook. "If it's not too late, I'll talk." Laura nodded. "It's not too late." When the door closed, she leaned against it and let the quiet settle. The truth hadn't roared. It hadn't demanded applause. It had simply kept speaking, and people had started listening. Bruno lifted his head from the rug, ears perked, eyes clear. Laura crossed the room and sat beside him, fingers resting where the bandage ended and the fur began. "We're not alone anymore," she said softly. Outside, the town held still, not in fear this time, but in attention, and attention, Laura knew, was where change began. The town didn't explode with outrage the way television liked to promise. It shifted slowly, unevenly, like ice breaking under a careful foot. Laura felt it in small places first. A cashier who met her eyes and said, "Glad your partner's okay." A mechanic who waved her ahead in line without making a show of it. The whispers were still there, but they had changed tone. Less warning, more reckoning. At the station, paperwork piled high. Affidavits, supplemental statements, requests for footage. Laura handled them one by one, steady as a metronome. The chief stopped by her desk with a coffee she hadn't asked for. He didn't say much, he didn't have to. "Take the afternoon," he said. "Check on Bruno." She did. The vet's office buzzed with a different energy now. Routine, hopeful. Bruno stood when Laura entered, careful but determined, his bandages lighter than before. He pressed his head against her knee and stayed there, breathing warm and real. "He's ahead of schedule," the vet said. "Still needs time, but he'll get there." Laura nodded, gratitude tightening her throat. Progress wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Outside. Her phone buzzed, a message from the prosecutor. "Defense filed a motion, we're ready." Laura read it twice, then slid the phone into her pocket. She'd learned that anticipation wasted energy better spent on the present. Across town, consequences continued to ripple. A contract was suspended. A fundraiser quietly canceled. A billboard came down overnight, leaving a pale rectangle behind. Ryan Hull kept a low profile, his name still carried weight, but it didn't move rooms the way it used to. Jack called that evening. "You see the council agenda?" He asked. "I did." "Public comment's going to be interesting." Laura smiled faintly. That's one word for it. She cooked dinner and ate at the table this time. The window cracked to let in the early spring air. Bruno rested nearby, eyes half closed, ears alert. When a car passed too slowly, Laura noticed, so did he. They waited. The car moved on at the council meeting. Chairs filled quickly, not with shouting, with people. One by one, they stood and spoke, measured, personal, imperfect. A teacher, a shop owner, a retired dock worker. No speeches about politics, just lines about responsibility and what it meant to share a town. Laura didn't speak. She didn't need to. The vote passed narrowly. Oversight tightened. Procedures clarified. Not a revolution, a correction. Later, Laura drove past the marina Jack was locking up. She stopped, rolled down the window. "Thanks," she said. He nodded. "For what?" "For not stepping back." He considered that. "Someone taught me once that stepping back is still a choice." At home, Laura sat on the floor beside Bruno, stretching his leg gently the way the vet had shown her. He leaned into the contact, trusting. She breathed with him until the room felt quiet again. The aftermath wasn't clean, it wasn't finished. There were still hearings ahead, motions to answer, nights when fear would knock just to see if the door was unlocked. But there was also this. a dog healing, a town paying attention. Lines redrawn in pencil and then traced in ink. Laura rested her hand on Bruno's shoulder and felt the steady thrum beneath her palm. Aftermath, she thought, wasn't an ending. It was where responsibility began. Jack Turner had never liked attention. Not when it came with praise, not when it came with questions. He preferred mornings at the marina, the steady creak of docks and the honest weight of rope in his hands. Things that did what they were supposed to do. That week, the marina felt different. People lingered longer when they saw him. Conversations paused, then resumed in softer tones. A fisherman he barely knew offered a nod that carried more meaning than words. Jack accepted it the same way he accepted the tide, without ceremony. He fixed a loose cleat, replaced a cracked plank, and worked through the hours until the sun slid low. No interviews, no statements. When a reporter showed up with a camera and a hopeful smile, Jack shook his head once. "Not interested," he said, already turning away. At the courthouse, proceedings moved forward without him. His testimony was on record. His part was done. That was how he measured things, by whether they were finished. Laura stopped by the marina late that afternoon. She didn't bring news. She didn't bring thanks. She brought coffee and set it on the workbench between them. "Bruno walked the block today," she said. Jack smiled at that, not wide, real good. They stood there watching the water darken. Gulls cried overhead. The wind carried the smell of salt and fuel, familiar, grounding. "You know," Laura said, "people keep asking about you." Jack shrugged. "They'll stop." "Maybe," she said, "but what you did mattered." Jack considered the water. "A lot of things matter," he replied. "Most don't get noticed." That evening, he locked up and drove home the long way, past streets he rarely used. He noticed a truck in his mirror for a few blocks. Then not. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He turned once, then twice, and the truck disappeared. At home, he fed his dog, cleaned his boots, and sat with the lights off, listening to the radio. The anchor talked about accountability and community standards. Jack turned it down. He slept well. Laura, on the other hand, slept lightly. She'd learned to. In the quiet hours before dawn, she checked on Bruno, felt his steady breathing, and let herself believe, just for a moment, that this was enough. The next morning, Jack packed his tools into the truck and drove to the marina earlier than usual. He left a note for the dockmaster, out for the day, and headed north, away from town, toward a stretch of water where the docks were older and the work was simpler. He spent the day replacing boards for a man who paid cash and asked no questions. They worked in silence. It suited him. By the time he returned, dusk had settled. Jack parked, grabbed his jacket, and paused when he saw Laura's cruiser across the street. She stood beside it. Bruno at her heel, harness lighter now, steps steadier. "I didn't come to interrupt," she said. "Just wanted to let you know, things are moving. The right way." Jack nodded. "They usually do, eventually." Bruno looked up at Jack, tail giving a slow, confident sweep. Jack knelt, careful, and scratched behind his ears. "You did good," he murmured. Laura watched, understanding something she hadn't before. Heroes didn't always stay. Sometimes they stepped in, did what was necessary, and stepped back out so others could carry on. Jack stood, adjusted his jacket, and glanced toward the darkening road. "Take care of him," he said to Laura. "I will." He walked away without looking back, and the town, for once, let him go. Spring arrived quietly. Without ceremony, the cold loosened its grip, and the town followed suit, stretching back into routine with a caution learned the hard way. Laura noticed the change on her morning walks. Windows opened an inch wider. Conversations lingered a beat longer. What healed? Healing adjacent, Bruno walked beside her with measured confidence. His stride wasn't what it used to be. Not yet. But it was steady. The harness had been adjusted, lighter now, fitted to a body that remembered pain and chose movement anyway. Laura matched his pace without thinking. They'd learned how to read each other all over again. At the station, Laura returned to full duty. No ceremony there either, just a nod from the sergeant, a schedule handed over, the familiar hum of radios and keyboards. The case continued its slow march through the system. Motions answered hearings scheduled. Less noise, more substance. Ryan Cole kept his distance when his name surfaced. It came with qualifiers now. Alleged, under review, pending, power didn't disappear. It recalibrated. Laura accepted that. What mattered was that recalibration had been forced. One afternoon, Laura brought Bruno to the training field for a light session, nothing demanding. Sit, stay, recall. Bruno executed each command with focus, tail moving in a restrained arc. When Laura paused, he paused. When she smiled, he leaned into her knee. "Good," she said. "That's good." She felt eyes on them and turned to see a small group of recruits watching quietly. One of them spoke up. "He's the dog from the video, right?" Laura nodded once. "He's my partner." Respect settled in the space between them, not curiosity, respect. That evening, Laura drove past the marina out of habit. Jack's truck wasn't there. She didn't slow this time. She understood something she hadn't before. Trust didn't require proximity. Some people stayed present by stepping away at home. Laura cooked dinner and ate with the windows open. Bruno rested on his rug, eyes tracking shadows, alert but calm. She checked the mail and found a handwritten note addressed simply to Officer Mitchell. Inside, "Thank you for not backing down. No name, no return address." She set it on the counter and let it be. Later, as dusk settled, Laura took Bruno out one last time. They walked the familiar block. A neighbor waved. A child asked to pet him and waited for permission. Laura nodded. Bruno stood still, accepting gentle hands. Trust offered and returned. Back inside, Laura brushed his fur carefully around the healed places. The scars were there if you knew how to look. Thin lines beneath hair grown back in uneven patterns. They told a story without asking to be retold. Laura sat on the floor beside him, back against the couch, breathing in sync. She thought about fear, how it used to arrive all at once, loud and overwhelming. Now it came differently, quieter, more manageable. Trust had moved in where panic once lived. Her phone buzzed with a message from the prosecutor. Next hearing set, strong footing. Laura replied with a simple acknowledgement and set the phone aside. Bruno shifted, resting his head on her thigh. The weight was familiar. Grounding. "You're okay," she whispered, not just to him. Outside, the town settled into evening streetlights flickered on somewhere. Choices were being reconsidered. Somewhere else, someone decided to speak when they might have stayed silent. Before, scars didn't mean weakness, they meant survival and trust. Once broken, once repaired, meant something stronger than before. The hearing ended without spectacle. No raised voices, no dramatic verdict read aloud for cameras. Just a gavel, a schedule, and a quiet understanding that consequences had begun their slow work. Laura left the courthouse as the afternoon light thinned. She didn't look for Ryan Cole. She didn't need to. His name would surface again, in motions, in footnotes, in negotiations conducted behind closed doors. But the moment that mattered had already passed. The line had been drawn in public. It couldn't be erased at home. Bruno waited by the door, posture easy, eyes bright. The bandages were gone now, replaced by time and careful routine. Laura clipped the leash on, and they stepped outside together, the evening air cool and forgiving. They walked the long way, past the park, and the row of small shops that had learned, at last, to meet her gaze. A man sweeping his stoop paused and nodded. A woman walking her dog smiled, nothing extraordinary, everything different. At the edge of town, the marina lights glimmered against the water. Laura stopped. She didn't expect to see Jack, and she didn't, still. She felt his presence there, in the work done and left undone, in the way some people shaped a place simply by refusing to bend. Bruno paused, then sat. Laura crouched beside him, fingers brushing the spot behind his ear he liked best. He leaned into her touch, steady and sure. "You remember?" she asked softly. He did. She knew he did. Animals remembered in ways people sometimes forgot. Through trust, through instinct, through the choice to stand when standing mattered. Back home, Laura made tea and sat on the floor with Bruno as night settled in. The news played quietly from the other room. A brief mention of reforms, a line about service animals and accountability. Then the broadcast moved on. That was fine. The story didn't need a headline anymore. Laura thought about the first sound she'd heard that day, the scrape of boots on pavement, the moment fear turned into resolve. She thought about the way power tried to reclaim the night and found resistance instead. She thought about how quickly silence learned to speak when someone gave it permission. Bruno shifted closer, resting his head on her knee. Laura rested her hand on his shoulder and felt the calm there, earned and honest. The hearing ended without spectacle, no raised voices, no dramatic verdict read aloud for cameras. Just a gavel, a schedule, and a quiet understanding that consequences had begun their slow work. Laura left the courthouse as the afternoon light thinned. She didn't look for Ryan Cole. She didn't need to. His name would surface again, in motions, in footnotes, in negotiations conducted behind closed doors. But the moment that mattered had already passed. The line had been drawn in public. It couldn't be erased. At home, Bruno waited by the door, posture easy, eyes bright. The bandages were gone now, replaced by time and careful routine. Laura clipped the leash on, and they stepped outside together, the evening air cool and forgiving. They walked the long way, past the park and the row of small shops that had learned, at last, to meet her gaze. A man sweeping his stoop paused and nodded. A woman walking her dog smiled, nothing extraordinary, everything different. At the edge of town, the marina lights glimmered against the water. Laura stopped. She didn't expect to see Jack, and she didn't still. She felt his presence there, in the work done and left undone, in the way some people shaped a place simply by refusing to bend. Bruno paused, then sat or crouched beside him, fingers brushing the spot behind his ear. He liked best, he leaned into her touch, steady and sure. "You remember?" she asked softly. He did. She knew he did. Animals remembered in ways people sometimes forgot. Through trust, through instinct, through the choice to stand when standing mattered. Back home, Laura made tea and sat on the floor with Bruno as night settled in. The news played quietly from the other room. A brief mention of reforms, a line about service animals and accountability. Then the broadcast moved on. That was fine. The story didn't need a headline anymore. Laura thought about the first sound she'd heard that day, the scrape of boots on pavement. The moment fear turned into resolve. She thought about the way power tried to reclaim the night and found resistance instead. She thought about how quickly silence learned to speak when someone gave it permission. Bruno shifted closer, resting his head on her knee. Laura rested her hand on his shoulder and felt the calm there, earned and honest. Tomorrow would bring work. Tomorrow would bring work. Paperwork, training. The ordinary responsibilities that held a town together when no one was watching. Laura welcomed it. Ordinary was where trust lived now. She turned off the light and sat in the dark a while longer, listening to the house breathe. Outside, cars passed and moved on somewhere. A choice would be made. Quiet or courage. Someone would remember what happened here and decide how to act. Laura stood and clipped Bruno's leash again, opening the door for one last look at the night. He stepped forward without hesitation. The echo that remained wasn't fear, it was resolve. And that, Laura knew, was how change stayed. The hearing ended without spectacle. No raised voices, no dramatic verdict read aloud for cameras. Just a gavel, a schedule, and a quiet understanding that consequences had begun their slow work. Laura left the courthouse as the afternoon light thinned. She didn't look for Ryan Cole. She didn't need to. His name would surface again, in motions, in footnotes, in negotiations conducted behind closed doors. But the moment that mattered had already passed. The line had been drawn in public. It couldn't be erased at home. Bruno waited by the door, posture easy, eyes bright. The bandages were gone now, replaced by time and careful routine. Laura clipped the leash on, and they stepped outside together, the evening air cool and forgiving. They walked the long way, past the park and the row of small shops that had learned, at last, to meet her gaze. A man sweeping his stoop paused and nodded. A woman walking her dog smiled, nothing extraordinary, everything different. At the edge of town, the marina lights glimmered against the water. Laura stopped. She didn't expect to see Jack, and she didn't, still, She felt his presence there, in the work done and left undone, in the way some people shaped a place simply by refusing to bend. Bruno paused, then sat. Laura crouched beside him, fingers brushing the spot behind his ear he liked best. He leaned into her touch, steady and sure. "You remember?" she asked softly. He did. She knew he did. Animals remembered in ways people sometimes forgot. Through trust, through instinct, through the choice to stand when standing mattered. Back home, Laura made tea and sat on the floor with Bruno as night settled in. The news played quietly from the other room. A brief mention of reforms, a line about service animals and accountability. Then the broadcast moved on. That was fine. The story didn't need a headline anymore. Laura thought about the first sound she'd heard that day, the scrape of boots on pavement. The moment fear turned into resolve. She thought about the way power tried to reclaim the night and found resistance instead. She thought about how quickly silence learned to speak when someone gave it permission. Bruno shifted closer, resting his head on her knee. Laura rested her hand on his shoulder and felt the calm there, earned and honest. The hearing ended without spectacle, no raised voices, no dramatic verdict read aloud for cameras. Just a gavel, a schedule, and a quiet understanding that consequences had begun their slow work. Laura left the courthouse as the afternoon light thinned. She didn't look for Ryan Cole. She didn't need to. His name would surface again, in motions, in footnotes, in negotiations conducted behind closed doors. But the moment that mattered had already passed. The line had been drawn in public. It couldn't be erased. At home, Bruno waited by the door, posture easy, eyes bright. The bandages were gone now, replaced by time and careful routine. Laura clipped the leash on, and they stepped outside together. The evening air cool and forgiving. They walked the long way, past the park and the row of small shops that had learned, at last, to meet her gaze. A man sweeping his stoop paused and nodded. A woman walking her dog smiled, nothing extraordinary, everything different. At the edge of town, the marina lights glimmered against the water. Laura stopped. She didn't expect to see Jack, and she didn't still. She felt his presence there, in the work done and left undone, in the way some people shaped a place simply by refusing to bend. Bruno paused, then sat. Laura crouched beside him, fingers brushing the spot behind his ear. He liked best. He leaned into her touch, steady and sure. "You remember?" she asked softly. He did. She knew he did. Animals remembered in ways people sometimes forgot. Through trust, through instinct, through the choice to stand when standing mattered. Back home, Laura made tea and sat on the floor with Bruno as night settled in. The news played quietly from the other room. A brief mention of reforms, a line about service animals and accountability. Then the broadcast moved on. That was fine. The story didn't need a headline anymore. Laura thought about the first sound she'd heard that day, the scrape of boots on pavement. The moment fear turned into resolve. She thought about the way power tried to reclaim the night and found resistance instead. She thought about how quickly silence learned to speak when someone gave it permission. Bruno shifted closer, Resting his head on her knee, Laura rested her hand on his shoulder and felt the calm there, earned and honest. Tomorrow would bring work. Tomorrow would bring work. Paperwork, training. The ordinary responsibilities that held a town together when no one was watching. Laura welcomed it. Ordinary was where trust lived now. She turned off the light and sat in the dark a while longer, listening to the house breathe. Outside, cars passed and moved on somewhere. A choice would be made. Quiet or courage. Someone would remember what happened here and decide how to act. Laura stood and clipped Bruno's leash again, opening the door for one last look at the night. He stepped forward without hesitation. The echo that remained wasn't fear, it was resolve. And that, Laura knew, was how change stayed.